But I must ask, in the sense of promoting being Black, and I'll use Reasonable Doubt, the new series that's just come out, series three, as I was doing my research. And, you have a Black director, Kerry Washington, who's well known, who was on Scandalous or whatever the TV show was,
Mm-hmm.
and she's come through and she's brought in her Black writer as well to be on this show. Now I'm sat at home and I'm watching this. To me, I was seeing pornography because there was a lot of naked scenes. I'm like, come on now. Do you know what I mean? I'm starting to feel uncomfortable in my own house. But Jax is going through real life trauma, in terms of the series. I don't know if you've seen it, but where I'm going with this is we have our children, and like you said, we share this content because we want them to understand, but they are children. When they're watching this, they become curious, right? So you're seeing
Mm-hmm.
sex scenes from sex scene to left, right, center, but we're trying to promote the fact that she's being stereotyped and she's being pushed out of a law firm. And then she goes and gets
Mm-hmm.
braids. Do braids actually make a
Mm-hmm.
person Black? Is the question that I'm asking. Because, being Black is not me wearing a dashiki or doing braids. When you
Mm-hmm.
look at me, you can see I'm different shades of brown, right? And then you know what I am. I guess where I'm going with this is, do we have to live up to the stereotype of being Black if we're saying it causes, there's a lot of trauma and it causes a lot of mental health, looking at that character, because that's not the real person in terms of Jax, and how she's
Mm-hmm.
being portrayed, and how her getting her independence back is through braids? To
Mm-hmm.
me, that
Mm-hmm.
just, I mean, I was fast
Mm-hmm.
forwarding for the sake of this interview, but just to
Yeah.
get something. I don't know what your thoughts in terms of that, because it is something that the media pushes as well, to say to be Black, one has to be this way. I'm not strong 24/7, and braids are
Yes.
uncomfortable for me personally. My scalp
Mm-hmm.
just doesn't like them. So I don't know what your
Mm-hmm.
thoughts are.
Yeah, yes. Um, I and I'm loving this question too because I think it's very relevant to some of the findings that I've had in my like dissertation. The first part in particular you mentioned about youth having access to content that is very like sexualized or that has a lot of things that a lot of youth are too young to really be able to understand and let alone they should not even be watching. Um, there's have been like found disparities in what's called like the adultification of Black youth versus youth of other races and ethnicities. And so, like, what research is finding is that um, at disparate rates, Black youth start to be viewed by those in their communities as adults who can handle trauma or stressful content or sexualization much faster than youth of the same ages. So you see this amongst Black girls who are sexualized from a very young age, who are hearing messages that they should not be hearing at 13 years old, and the detrimental impact that that has on their mental health. It is something that we're seeing in disparate rates for Black youth. Like they're being exposed to way too much content that is not like developmentally appropriate. And so, just to touch on that part, I do think there should be more boundaries surrounding what Black youth are having access to online and on television and in media. And I wish there was more developmentally appropriate content for younger Black kids, so that they can see versions of themselves that still protect their innocence, right, and their safety, and that allow them to grow at rates similar to their peers. So that's something I think is really important. The other aspect that you're talking about of like depictions of Black women in media and what our strength means and what our resistance means. And I haven't seen this show, but like this example of like wearing braids as opposed to maybe straightening her hair or like wearing a wig. Um, I'm very fascinated by like Black women's like relationship with their hair. There's actually like a field called like hair psychology, that is also very fascinating, where it talks about how a lot of young Black folks, if they're not taught to like really have a relationship with their hair, it can make it really difficult to feel salient in their identity. And they're even now training some barbers and like hairstylists to learn some like mental health skills, because sometimes we spend a lot of time in their chair and you end up talking about your life anyway. And so that's one of those community approaches where like training people in the community to address mental health concerns can really strengthen the amount of resources that we have. So I think that's really cool. But in terms of like this singular depiction of like a Black woman taking back her resistance through wearing braids, I could absolutely see why some Black women would find that to not be like an affirming depiction for them. Black women should be allowed, and I think anyone, right, of any race or gender expression should be allowed to present however they feel comfortable. For me, right, like I grew up getting perms all the time. Now I've decided to get locks, and I love that. Sometimes I wear wigs because I want to switch it up. Like that doesn't define me. It's just another form of expression, of expressing, you know, our gender and our place in the world. And I can hear kind of what you're saying, which is that like seeing that depiction in conversation with the struggle she's going with didn't necessarily feel liberating or radical or like groundbreaking, you know? And so that's why I think it's so important for us to have a breadth of depictions of Black folks in the media, so that all of us can feel somewhat seen in something. For me, I love the show Insecure. I don't know if you've seen that show, with Issa Rae. Is amazing. I would highly recommend it. She goes through like 100 hairstyles on that show. And the show is about, you know, a Black woman who is a young adult and starts from a very insecure place. And then throughout the duration of the show, she has a lot of healing and affirming experiences, and then becomes a more secure and confident person. And there's a lot of ways that that can be done. And so that's why we deserve very diverse depictions of our lived experiences, so that we can feel affirmed and confident. And we deserve that in our art, just like anyone else.
No, I love that. I guess the next question that I have, just touching on the shows that we've discussed as well, and from my research as well, I learned that, you know, a lot of households, the woman is like the head for Black Americans, and I guess what I was trying to understand is the impact on those children. And from what I was gathering as well, in terms of thematic analysis, it seemed as if there was a lot of instability, where the dads have been sent to prison and others that, you know, they will die there essentially. But again, some of the cases, there were certain nuances which link back to inequality, but not to focus on that, to focus on the children. Do you think then, again, going back to the work that you do with 8-year-olds to 25-year-old, that there is an impact when you just have a one parent household?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You know, I think for any child to be raised in a system where there's only one consistent caregiver or caretaker, it puts a lot of stress on that caretaker, to be everything all at once, right? To be the caring figure, to be the protector, to be the breadwinner, to be the one that's always showing up for them in different spaces, who's advocating for them. There is evidence and research out there that shows, you know, whether it's like a single mom or a single father, which also comes up sometimes, you know, due to various different reasons, it can do a lot to their mental health distress. And so the kids are often more likely to witness that their parents are having a hard time. And sometimes this can lead them to feel, you know, concerned that they might be a burden, or to feel like, oh, I can't go to my parent for this thing because they're already dealing with so much stress. So I think that is something that can be so devastating to witness in our community. And I really appreciate you naming the systemic aspect of that as well. Like I will just mention it because it is, part of my research, but I've interviewed young folks who have an incarcerated parent that they have not been able to see consistently. And, there's a lot of research that's come out quite recently in the US about how there is this history of, Black men in particular being put in the judicial system, of being incarcerated, and how that has destabilized a lot of Black families and has led to this legacy of like a disconnection between like this sort of nuclear family that, Black folks have historically been able to thrive in. So incarceration, systemic injustice is a big part of that. But I'll say for someone like me, I was raised predominantly by my mother, but also by my grandmother and by my aunts, and I lived in an intergenerational household. And I think that's such a beautiful way that a lot of, Black families have tried to, sort of expand the idea of what it looks like to have a caretaking system for Black youth. It shouldn't just be the one person. I always say that like it takes a village to raise a child, right? Like that old saying. And I think it's absolutely true. If my mom was the only person, and I'm an only child, but just for her to be working full time, going to school full time, and raising me, man, that would have been so distressing. And so I'm so grateful that we had a larger community of family members, of friends, of neighbors that could all pitch in and do their part, so that I never felt like I was coming from this place of lack. And I do have a father, and he's great too. I will name that too. Like I love my relationship with him, and I think having that paternal figure is so important. But also, I will just name for kiddos who maybe have lost one of their parents. Like it's so important for us as community members to step in and support one another when we see that there's a need there.
No, thank you very much for your response. I guess the next question then is to do with holistic healing. I know that this is something that you're passionate about. And what is it for the audience at home, and why have you chosen to go down this path?
Yes. So holistic healing models, the way that I conceptualize them, are rooted in liberation psychology, which is essentially this idea that when you are working with someone who is experiencing distress, you should not just be targeting whatever the mental health symptom is, right? If someone is coming in with depression, you shouldn't just focus on lowering those levels of depression. Yes, that's important and that should be a priority, but also it's important to recognize the system that that person lives in that is also contributing to the chronicity of their mental health distress. And so coming from a psychological lens, a biological lens, are they having access to, nutritious food? Do they have the finances to be able to support themselves? How are their family relationships looking like, and their communal relationships? What type of values are in alignment with their identity? Keeping all of those things in mind is much more likely to sustain mental health healing than just looking at a singular factor. And so I think one thing that I'm very grateful that I've been able to do, especially right now that I'm in the last year of my doctoral program and I'm working as a clinician full time, is to work on interdisciplinary teams where I'm coming in looking at things from a psychological approach, but I'm also working with social workers who are helping our patients to get in touch with the means that they need to be able to like have transportation, or to have consistent food, or to find a job. Working with psychiatrists who can speak to the biological elements of their mental health, if they're in need of medication that can help them to have the resources to live a stable life. Working with case managers as well, who are also doing that work of connecting them with communal resources. So holistic healing in general is something that I really align with because it's so collectivist, it's so culturally grounding, and it is recognizing that like healing doesn't happen in a vacuum. There's a lot of contributing things that can play a role in it, and we all deserve to have a team to support us so that we can grow.
Which goes back to your initial response about the PhD, that one needs a support bubble. You don't pass it by yourself.
Yes,
You need your community
yes.
behind you. No, I love it. I guess the next question then, if you were to have your elevator pitch moment, why should Black Americans enroll to holistic healing, in your opinion?
Well, to put it simply, because we deserve it. As human beings, we all deserve to have holistic healing models to ensure that we can thrive and not just survive chronically unjust conditions. Holistic healing is not just like a clinical call. It's like a call to action politically, socially, economically, um, and in familial ways for us to be able to recognize that we deserve consistent support on various levels and that we should also be a part of the holistic healing of other people in our communities. It's focused on us continuing to lift each other up and using the like individual and unique gifts that we all have. And so if someone is like a good, cook, helping someone else who may not be able to cook for themselves, but maybe that person is really good at fixing cars, and so that person can like pour back into them in that way by providing a service. It's something that is ancestral. It's something that our communities have done for generations, of one, being able to recognize what we deserve and to be able to focus on fostering community to help us to get the support that we need. And as professionals, whether we're mental health professionals, legal professionals, whatever, whether we're working in the government, I think we also have a civic duty to contribute to holistic care models to ensure that we all are living lives that allow our communities to thrive in the ways that we deserve.
I love that. I might just sign up. You've
Mhm.
got me.
Me too. Me too.
But in terms of your research methods, then I think this is the most difficult thing with a PhD. And most
Mhm.
people, when they start their journey, they think, right, I want to do quants, and they walk in, but there's so much that comes with it, and it starts from reading. So, how
Yeah.
did you get to a point whereby you were happy with the fact that you could go ahead with qualitative and quants for publication? What got you there? Was it passion? Was it just the fact that you realized maybe from reading some of the manuscripts or journals that you've read in your field that there was a lot more quants? Maybe that's what made you go for it, or maybe a lot more qualitative, or maybe it was mixed methods. I have no idea. What was that got you there?
Yes, I think in general, being a psychologist, we're considered one of the social sciences, right, or the soft sciences. We're often put in colleges of art and sciences. And I strongly believe that psychology lives at the intersection of science and art. And so, therefore, our methods for conducting rigorous research, but also very nuanced research, requires diverse methods for collecting data in order to be able to stake our claims and to provide enough different resources to be able to feel confident in our findings. And so I have really responded well to mixed methodology because it combines that scientific rigor where you're using quantitative um, assessments and surveys and tools that have been validated and found to be reliable across different communities, because it helps you to make these stronger claims about the associations that you're making right across different mechanisms that you're studying. Alongside that, there's also a recognition that in a lot of ways the field is behind in having enough surveys and quantitative tools to really be able to speak to the nuanced lived experiences of diverse populations. And so, therefore, qualitative methods where we're collecting raw data from different unique communities gives us a strong foundation for then creating stronger quantitative tools in the future that is rooted from a very real place of talking to community members. Qualitative research, even outside of that aim of strengthening quantitative skills, also helps us to make our findings more accessible and more relevant to the communities that we're serving, because they're in our community's languages. They offer nuances that the numbers alone don't always provide. And so they allow you to both look at like different patterns amongst populations, but also processes that they experience that, maybe things that were created in the ivory tower alone don't necessarily understand. It also helps to bridge gaps in accessibility. One reason that I love participatory action research is because the goal is for us as scientists to connect with community members and to teach them how to research their own communities with different tools, right? And so sometimes that means partnering with organizations and giving them our, different quantitative tools so that they can do surveys on their community members, or teaching them some basic skills in like qualitative interviewing, because they have more of a direct connection with their community members so that they can do their own research and present it in ways that feel salient for them. And so for my dissertation, for example, I did a combination of quantitative pre and post data collection on different like psychological factors impacting Black youth. But I also did exit qualitative interviews with the youth that I worked with to look at the impact of engaging in participatory action research on their psychological well-being and their critical consciousness development. So those are three distinct research methodologies that I used, but through the process, I thought that it was so important to be able to capture the varying nuances in, the changes in their mental health pre-YPAR to post-YPAR, what they felt were the biggest beneficiary factors, strengths and weaknesses of engaging in YPAR in their own words through the exit interviews, and through the participatory action research methodology itself, being able to highlight all of the different strengths that youth were able to gain by learning how to be their own researchers and be their own scientists and advocates. A little more nuance for my project, I actually used the tool of photo voice, where I gave youth cameras and really worked with them to go out in their communities and capture things that they felt best represented their communities, whether it's, environmental injustices that they recognize happening there, communal strengths, mentors in their communities that really spoke to them, both the risk and resiliency factors contributing to their mental health. And that whole process in itself, I view as a clinician as healing, because it empowers youth, it gives them tools for expression outside of just talk therapy, and it allows them to come into their own voices so that maybe they will grow up and become interested in becoming research scientists and contribute to our field, right? And I felt that in order to really evaluate the efficacy of those types of efforts, I would need to do pre and post quantitative surveys to look at their stress, their future orientation, their critical consciousness, their community engagement interest, seeing if it changed over time. And we did see that stress decreased by half for youth who were enrolled in this program. But also we did exit interviews because youth were also evaluating the efficacy of the work that we were doing. And so I wanted to hear in their own words, what did you think of this process of doing photo voice? What did it mean to you? How are you conceptualizing it, right? And being able to have their photo projects, their research projects, as well as their feedback allows me to now move forward in the future, being able to continue to refine and rework any sort of programs that I create for youth of color, so that they are, directly responsive to what youth are telling me that they need.
That's really interesting. And I guess the next question that I will ask you is in regards to your ethics approval, because you were
Yes.
doing something very sensy, as they would call it, and
Mm-hmm.
about to decline the first application. So To give guidance to those at home, because you've mentioned churches again, well, in the UK, they're seen as charity organizations. So if you're going to go there, you need a letter, etc., etc. And with the work that you do, working with young adults, again, the questions would be there. So what's your guidance to somebody who's listening to you today and they're like, do you know what, this is the path that I want to focus on, and I'm really passionate and I'm excited. I never knew that, enabling your participants could be so beneficial, right? Future wise and current situ. What's your guidance?
Mm-hmm. Be patient is an important aspect of it. I had to do a lot of research because I was working with young people in the community to ensure that I was engaging in ethical forms of data collection, of providing resources, of engaging in the participatory work, right? And ensuring that I was asking questions that were appropriate. I think what was the most helpful for me, again, operating from a clinical lens, is to connect with other folks who have also done participatory action research, being able to gather their IRBs with their approval and really understand the language that they used and the safeguards that they put in place to ensure that they were engaging in research ethically. So some ways that I ensured that I was doing that was by making sure that I was connecting with parents directly and my community partners to ensure that, the questions that I was asking were appropriate and that I had their full consent to engage their youth in research. This also didn't happen within school systems. So I conducted these as summer programs at community centers where if parents were interested in their youth gaining research skills, they enrolled them in the program. And I also got consent from the young people themselves and let them know throughout the entire process, if you don't want to do this interview, if you don't want to take pictures, if you don't want to do an exit, qualitative interview or fill out surveys, you don't have to. You can just be here and be in community with other young folks and have fun. It was so important to not put pressure on the people who wanted to be involved in the program and just allowing them to make their own decisions, because that's what, again, fosters their autonomy. And so I was very fortunate that a lot of youth were interested in contributing to research and to having their voices centered. But I also wanted to protect their anonymity. So we weren't using any of the youth's names. They weren't allowed to take pictures of other people's faces. They were taking pictures of different spaces that could be anonymous so that they weren't easily identified, so that we weren't jeopardizing their safety in any way across the process. We also came up with a list of safety guidelines. So the youth were not alone at any point while they were taking pictures. They were with myself and the different community partners that were leading the program, or they were with their parents. They weren't going to spaces that were unsafe on their own, or in general, they were going to unsafe spaces. But we were putting in a lot of guidelines to ensure that, we were treating them like youth, like young people, and that they felt safe and that they had the support they needed along the way. Also, because I think what's critical to my framework of helping youth to understand different systemic inequities, but also not feeling like the onus is on them to fix these injustices, I also built in a lot of mental health programming along the way, so that even if they were talking about something in their community that they wanted improved, that could be considered moderately stressful, they were also engaging in mindfulness activities. We were taking breaks so that they could eat snack. They talked to mentors. They were given a list of mental health resources in case they wanted to talk to a clinical provider. And in that way, this program was also meant to champion holistic healing, because it's not just giving them the knowledge that they need to challenge unjust conditions. It's recognizing that they are children, they are young people, and that if they want to engage in safe forms of advocacy work, in this case, creating art to depict things they were passionate about, they also had space for rest and for safety and for containment through adults who were working with them. So all of that took a very long time to put together before I even started data collection. And I really think in order to do a project like this, it does require time and nuance, and no part of the process should be rushed, so that you're ensuring that you're giving the communities that you're working with the care and the resources that they deserve.
No, I love that. Thank you very much for sharing your journey. I guess the next question then has to do with conferences. Why is networking so important at conferences, in your opinion?
Yes. And, I hope I don't sound like a broken record here, but again, I think community building is integral to both our personal development, but also the development of the field as a whole. We have to be in conversation with one another as we are, asking different research questions, so that we can support one another in getting the answers that we need, and so that we can be more efficacious in putting out research projects. I've been so fortunate to go to some both national and international conferences and some local conferences in Houston, where I've met folks who are asking similar questions that I am in my research in some way, and I'm learning from what they're putting out there, and I'm able to sort of consult with them on the questions that I'm interested in. And we've even started, publishing together, so that we're also both contributing to our scholarly, place within the field. And so I think there's just so much benefit from being in continued conversation with each other. I think I've already mentioned Issa Rae once in this interview. I'm obsessed. She's one of my favorite celebrities, but she has this quote where she talks about how networking shouldn't just be happening from like bottom to top or top to bottom. It should be happening in a parallel sense as well. We should be networking across other people who are in the same space that we are professionally. And so when I was a first year in my doctoral program, of course, I wanted to talk to those who had big names in the field, right? And look to them for mentorship. But I was also talking to undergrad researchers and other graduate students who were still finding their scholarly voices. And through us continuing to have dialogue and to support and uplift each other and to collaborate, it helped us both to be able to be more confident and to have more of our work shared out in that field. So I think networking is so integral to community building. And again, it's about building a team of support so that we are, both having our individual growth and the field is growing alongside with us.
I love that. So then the next question then, in your opinion, does higher education break the poverty life cycle? Or do you think no, Noma, it doesn't work?
Mm. It's so hard speaking from being in the US. Like, I recognize there are nuances in other countries, but right now there are such huge barriers that are keeping postgraduates from having, financial freedom because of the extensive student loans that a lot of, postgraduates end up having to be held accountable for. And this again goes back to like the inequities in access to education, where if you're someone who comes from a family that doesn't have generational wealth and you decide to pursue a degree and you don't have a fellowship or a scholarship, maybe you do feel like you have to take out loans in order to pursue a degree. And then what happens after you get that degree is you may have a job that finally pays you based off of your experience, but you also have to end up paying student loans that continue to take money out of your pocket along the way. And so this is something very relevant to me. When I started my doctoral program, after taking some time to put away some money, I knew that I didn't want to join a program unless they had some form of funding available for me in the process. And often, it can be a pretty, like small sum of money that you're given as a grad student or as a TA or as a research assistant, but it should be enough that you have a safe place to live and you have food to eat. And then along the way, I was continuing to apply for like more external funding and was fortunate to get a couple of different scholarships and fellowships so that, I was making consistent money to live a little bit more comfortably. But I think that's why it's so important for those of us who are lifting the next generation of researchers up to continue to champion them applying for funding and to advocate for them to have funding in these programs so that even if you don't come from a family with financial wealth, you can still pursue a graduate education and contribute to the field, because we deserve to do that. And we shouldn't have to be so distressed afterwards about the financial impact that it discourages us from pursuing our passions and dreams.
I love that. Now, the final question is, in your opinion, do you think PhD Hard Talk is beneficial for us as scientists, universities alike, and the communities in which we conduct our research in? Or do you think, no, Noma, it's not working, you need to do a bit of work, or just call it a day, it's not working? What are your thoughts?
I would never say that to you. Anyone who says that to you is a liar. This platform is phenomenal. And I was even telling you this, I think, before we started. You were the first person to reach out to me when I was, just a young baby graduate student, to share and disseminate my work on a global platform. And that was so huge for me. One, in being able to practice communicating my work in ways that are accessible, but also to be able to recognize the value in the work that I was doing because you saw that. And I think you do such an amazing job of finding talented researchers across the globe whose voices deserve to be centered. And it has a big impact on our sense of self and our self-worth. You really set that foundation for me. And I'm super grateful now to be able to come back and to tell you that now that I'm almost done with my program, because it is incredibly meaningful. One, because it, impacts the scholars directly and how we view ourselves as professionals. But also something I think that you also mentioned before we started is like, it also shows other people out there that they can also pursue PhD programs. When you see people who come from varied walks of life talk about their research, it really shows you that there could also be a pathway for you to be able to contribute to the field. So the access that you provide through disseminating on the multiple platforms, whether it's YouTube or TikTok or LinkedIn or whatever, it shows such a broad array of people that they also have voices that deserve to be centered. And so this is exactly the type of platform that is desperately needed within the field so that we can continue to push it forward, because we are showing people that it's possible. It's in the realm of possibility for them. It's something that can be tangible. And it also helps us to connect with one another on a global scale, which is phenomenal. And the fact that you've been able to do that while getting a PhD, wild, girl, like crazy wild in the best way possible. I love it. And I think you should be so proud of yourself.
No, thank you so much. I'm so humbled, and I don't know what to say, but just to say thank you very much, because again, like I said to you, if it wasn't for the guests, my dream and my vision wouldn't be what it is today. So I'm always humbled when I get those notifications like, oh my gosh, this started in 2021, and I'm like 2020, 26. It's always humbling for me. I guess the next point is, if you're interested in speaking to Robyn Douglas, who's going to be doctor soon, drum roll, details will be at the bottom. You may email or find her on LinkedIn. Details again will be at the bottom. But it's been such a pleasure to talk to you about your research. I know today we focused mainly on mental health in a pragmatic lens. But for the final one, it will be the Viva. So please come through. It will be a final one just to understand in terms of your research findings from your PhD. So I'm excited to talk to you about that. Thank you again for your time today.
Yes. Yes. Thank you so much as well. I am definitely coming back if you will have me. So excited and like just intellectually stimulated by all of our conversations and the questions you asked today. So thank you so much. I appreciate it, Noma.